Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is Amy's Bookshelf. Before you watch this video, I would just like to point out some very important information, and that is that Draco has been with me while I've been filming. You can't see him on camera because I'm over here and he is behind the camera, but I just wanted to let you know that he's been here and he will be supporting me throughout this monthly TBR video. Today I am going to go through all the books I read in April. So I think I read 10, if I've counted correctly, and it was a pretty mixed bag. I think all of my months tend to be quite mixed. Still not had loads of 5-star reads this year, but I've had a couple, so that's good. Yeah, so let's get into it. Okay, so firstly, 3 that I have now returned to the library, so I don't have physical copies anymore, and they are numbers 7, 8 and 9 in the Series of Unfortunate Events series, and they are The Vile Village, The Hostile Hospital and The Carnivorous Carnival. So I started reading this last year in May as part of my middle grade May. I'd always heard such good things about the series and I'd seen the film ages ago. I haven't seen the TV show, but I just wanted to know what the rest of the story was like because obviously the film only covers, I think, the first 3. And last year I really enjoyed them. They were really great middle grade books. I thought they were really fun and I thought they handled a lot of educational points really well, like teaching kids new words and new topics and ideas and concepts. I thought they dealt with them really well. So I've now read 3 more, so I've only got 4 left in the series, and I think now that I've read 9 of them, I've kind of come to the realisation that while they are really good kids books in terms of a fun adventure story, it doesn't take long to sort of peel back the surface and realise they haven't aged particularly well. And I think, like a lot of books that were written, say, 10, 20 years ago, if they were published now, they would be handled in a different way. And there's no like overall awfulness to it. It's just kind of like subtle undermining, you know, things like tiny bits of sexism and just the way like the characters are handled, and obviously for kids you don't really want to be seeping that into their brains. So I personally would still recommend these books, but get them out your library if you can, or get them from a second-hand bookshop or borrow them from a friend if they own them. I think that is kind of the best way to read these books nowadays, because yeah, overall I don't think they've aged that well, but I will finish the series because I have been getting them out of the library, which is a great way to support my library because they have all of the copies, and yeah, that's just the way I want to do it. But like I said, fun adventure stories, but perhaps a little bit problematic in 2023. Okay, and next up we have Troy by Stephen Fry. So if you've seen my other wrap-ups or any of my social media posts, then you'll know I have been reading this series by Stephen Fry for a little while. So I read Mythos a while ago now, probably 3 or 4 years ago, and then I read Heroes last month and I loved it so much that I immediately picked up Troy and wanted to read it this month. So Mythos is all about like the creation, all of the creation of the gods, how they came to be, their relationships to each other. Heroes is about the human heroes of Greek mythology, so people like Eurydice and Heracles, and their stories. And then Troy is about the Battle of Troy, and covers obviously the characters that take part in that and those that are affected by it as well. So loved Mythos, loved Heroes, enjoyed Troy, but not quite as good. And I think it's very obvious for me why, and that is because I loved the format of Mythos and Heroes in that it's basically lots of short stories, because every chapter is a new character, you get to learn about that character, and then it kind of touches all of the other characters and you understand the overall placement in Greek mythology. But I kind of loved how they were told as individual stories. Troy, however, is one story because obviously it's telling the Battle of Troy. Within it there are stories because obviously Stephen Fry has to give us information about why the characters are relevant to the story and how they play a part in the battle. But I think for me, I didn't enjoy the fact that it was an overall story and I was kind of having to thread everything together throughout. Stephen Fry is very, very aware of the fact that Greek mythology is confusing and contradictory, and it's very hard to remember all of the information he gives you, like all of the characters' names and their relationships to each other and what they can do and their history and all of that. it's difficult to remember at the best of times, and I think Troy is perhaps the hardest book in that sense because it's just complicated. And like I said, he's very aware of it, and he writes it in a way that really means if you forget pretty much everything he says, it's okay, you can still understand the story, and I love that, and that's why I still really liked this book. But I think this is a 4-star read, whereas Mythos and Heroes for me were easy 5-star reads. And I believe there is a 4th one of these coming out maybe this year or maybe next year, and I think that is maybe the Odyssey, so it'll be really interesting to see what that's like, and I will definitely be picking it up because, like I said, even though I didn't love this, I still really enjoyed it and would still recommend it as a great way for people to get to know Greek mythology. And my next read was A Kind of Spark by Elle McNicol, and this is a middle grade book, and it is about Addie. Addie is autistic, and I believe she's maybe 13, quite young because obviously it's a middle grade book, and it is basically about her learning in her school about the witch trials that took place in her little town in Scotland, and as she learns about them, she is horrified by the fact that all of these witches or women were persecuted and a lot of them killed and tortured for the fact that they were witches, and it is about her battle to give them justice while at the same time drawing a lot of parallels between their stories and her own. Really loved this book. It was a really brilliant book. I've not read many books with autistic rep, but I thought this one handled it really well. Obviously I can't speak from experience, and having not read many, there's not much I can compare it to, but I thought it was a really brilliant way to tell a fictional story while giving us a lot of factual, useful information about autism. Addie as a main character is really great. She's relatable and funny and clever, and she's just really likeable. I think you're rooting for her the entire time, and I really love like the character arc that she goes through, and the way that the author deals with that as well. So would really recommend this as a middle grade book for the autism rep, and also just for a really good story. It's under 200 pages, and obviously because it's middle grade it's relatively quick to get through, but I would really recommend it. Next is Tokyo Uno Station by Yu Miri, and this is translated from Japanese. I saw a few people had read this, and I was intrigued. I have a few Japanese translations already, and I loved this cover as well and found it in a charity shop, so I was very excited to pick it up. This focuses on Kazu, who is our protagonist, and it is basically about his life. I'll say first and foremost, this is not a plot-driven book. This is very much a character-driven book. So if you're not a fan of like slow character-driven stories, this probably isn't for you. So we meet Kazu when he is homeless, and he's telling us about his upbringing and his family and his marriage and child, and basically how that all disintegrated and how he ended up being homeless, and also the sort of government story that ties into that, like more widely in Japan, how that has affected the homeless community and just other people as well in the country. Now I really wanted to love it, and I think on paper, I mean, I love character-driven stories normally absolutely fine with that, but I think for this one it was just a bit messy. It jumped around in time a lot, like there was no cohesive timeline whatsoever. We could 1 minute be in the present and then suddenly jump like 20 years back with like no warning, and there's also no chapters in this book, so it's essentially one really long stream of consciousness just jumping around in time willy-nilly, and giving us the story of this person's life. Now I really enjoyed like the nuance to the emotional story, and I liked that it tried to have layers and depth, and ultimately there were a lot of really interesting commentaries on society, on Japan, on humanity, but I think for me I just needed more structure, and for that I think I gave it 3.5, because, you know, it was well written, I enjoyed it, it wasn't too long, so it didn't take too much of my time, but ultimately it's quite forgettable, and I think when something's forgettable you just can't love it that much. So would recommend it if that sounds like your cup of tea, but otherwise don't worry about it, you're probably not missing out on much. And next is 8 Detectives by Alex Pavesi. This was the April pick for my book club. If you want to join my book club, then the link is in the description. So we had chosen this because in my book club we have a Google form where everybody submits suggestions that they want to read, and then I basically handpick 6 of them every month. Everybody votes, and then one of them is chosen. In April I asked everybody to submit books that were really like under the radar, that had like, you know, only a few thousand reviews on Goodreads, that kind of thing, were books that no one had heard of, and this one came up and eventually won it. And this is a murder mystery thriller collection of short stories. Probably the best way to describe its genre. I'll explain that in a bit more detail. But essentially, there is one overarching murder mystery story, and within that, several murder mystery short stories. So it's a little bit confusing, but stay with me. Our protagonist, we have essentially two protagonists. One is called Grant McAllister. He was a mathematician and he basically worked out the rules of a good murder mystery. He then wrote a collection of murder mystery stories, and since writing that has then left the country, gone to live in isolation, and was essentially never heard from again. Enter our second protagonist, Julia Hart, who works for a publishing company who are interested in publishing this story by Grant McAllister, or sorry, collection of stories. And she tracks him down in this Mediterranean island, finds him as a recluse, and basically starts going through the stories with him in order to rewrite them. That probably already sounds confusing, and it will be even more confusing to then let you know that the way that this narrative is structured is we have alternating chapters between Grant and Julia in the present time, and then a short story from Grant's collection. So I believe there are 7 short stories overall. So we've got short story, plot, short story, plot, short story, plot. I hope that makes sense. I think I'm making this sound way more confusing than it actually is, and I really want to sell this book because I did enjoy it. But what I will say is if you like murder mysteries, you probably will enjoy it, because this book I think really plays into so many tropes intentionally of murder mysteries. So it's got like so many classic like tropes that you've seen in, you know, Agatha Christie or loads of other famous murder mysteries and murder mystery writers. So I think it's perfect for people who really want to enjoy that. I think it's a little bit flawed. As always, we had a very interesting discussion with my book club, and a lot of people brought up some very interesting criticisms, which I completely agreed with, to be honest. It's not a perfect book, but I do think it's really fun, and the murder mysteries alone are enough to keep this book really fast paced, because obviously everyone knows a whodunit is a really great way to read a book fast, because you just want to know who done it and get to the end of it. And because we have so many whodunits throughout this book, yeah, you can read it very quickly, it's very digestible, and yeah, overall it's just quite fun and clever and layered, and like I said, not perfect but enjoyable. So if you like murder mysteries and thrillers, definitely try and pick up a copy. Okay, and then I read Cleopatra and Frankenstein by Coco Mellors. So I'd heard amazing things about this book. It was pretty much all over Bookstagram last year, and I don't know why it took me this long to read it, but I did pick up a copy a few months ago and then put it in my TBR for April. So when I started reading this, I actually went in pretty blind. I didn't know much about this book going in. I knew it was a contemporary set in New York, and that was pretty much it. So I didn't really go in with much information. When I started reading it, after the first, say, 3 or 4 chapters, it felt really like A Little Life to me. If you don't know, I adore A Little Life. I know it's got plenty of criticism. I know it's not a perfect book, but I still love it. I read it like 5 years ago. I will never get over it. Loved it. And when I started reading this, I was like, oh my gosh, I found it. I found the book that will fill the A Little Life hole that is in my heart. And I will say, if that worries you, if that concerns you, having now finished this book, I actually think if you don't want to read A Little Life because it's really traumatic and you're worried about the trauma that you're going to put yourself through in reading it, I would recommend Cleopatra and Frankenstein, because it takes all of the really great things about A Little Life, but with not nearly as much trauma and sadness, and like, yeah, it's got flecks of tragedy in it, but overall it's very manageable. So if you are a person that are put off by reading A Little Life but like the concept of it, then pick up Cleopatra and Frankenstein. So to get into the plot, basically Cleopatra and Frankenstein are our protagonists. That's not their real names. Their real names are Cleo and Frank, and Cleopatra and Frankenstein are kind of their nicknames for each other. They meet in New York. Cleo is, I think, 24 when we meet her, and Frank is in his early 40s. There's quite a big age gap. They quickly fall in love and they get married quite quickly as well. And essentially this book is about their marriage. It's about what happens after they're married. It's about their friends, who they surround themselves with, their lives and their careers, how they affect each other. It's about their love story, but also about the tragedy of their love story. And there are a lot of very interesting elements. I'd say overall it's a character-driven story, but with a very good plot as well. And yeah, I really loved it. I said when I posted about it on Instagram that it's probably early days, but this probably will end up being one of my favourite reads of the year because I just really enjoyed it. The reason I compare it to A Little Life so much, some of the similarities I would say, is it's just a lot about the way that we love each other and the way that we hate each other. It just has these real introspective stories of all of the protagonists, and it's not just Cleo and Frank that we hear from. There are chapters from other people's perspectives as well, which is really great because we just get these like snapshots of people's lives and about like their happiness and their sadness and their triumphs and their letdowns, and I think it's just the perfect book on humanity and how we're all flawed and how we hurt each other a lot of the time, but how most of the time it's not intentional, and underneath it all we do all love each other, we just struggle to show it. So yeah, I would really recommend it if you enjoy kind of slow burn books that are character driven about relationships. Then yeah, I would really recommend Cleopatra and Frankenstein. Okay, two left. So first up we have Black Cake by Charmaine Wilkinson. This was the buddy read for Amy's book club. Once again, the link is in the description if you want to join my book club. So every month we read 2 books. One of them is, well, they're both optional obviously, but the main book is the one we do the Zoom read about, and then we also do a buddy read which not everybody takes part in, but the buddy read we just discuss every week on Instagram, and everyone can do it if they want to, but not everybody does. So anyway, the pick for April was Black Cake. I hadn't heard anything about Black Cake. I'd seen it, but I'd not really like seen any reviews or read any reviews, so I really didn't know what it was about. And essentially it is about 2 siblings and their relationship to their mother. I think that's the best way of describing it. Again, similar to Cleopatra and Frankenstein, I would describe it as a character-driven story but with a really good plot as well. So we meet our 2 protagonists after their mother's death, and they have a fractured relationship. They haven't seen each other in a while, and so it's about them reconnecting and also understanding what their mother's wishes were for them after she passed away. So we flick between the past and the present, trying to understand more about what happened to their relationships, how they ended up a bit estranged, and yeah, just what happened there. So yeah, overall I did really enjoy this. I think most people who took part in the buddy read also really enjoyed it, and just one of the really great things about this book is it has really short chapters. So if you're someone that just really likes getting through a book or like feeling like you're making a lot of progress, I'd really recommend this, because honestly most of the chapters are like 2-3 pages, which is brilliant because you really feel like you're getting through it. It switches perspectives quite a lot, which again keeps it quite fast paced as well as the short chapters. So yeah, I just really recommend it. I think this month has been a great example of character driven stories and why they are good, and this is definitely one that I would add into the mix. And my final read of the month was The Unlikely Pilgrimage of Harold Fry by Rachel Joyce. So a book that I don't think I have talked about much, and I'm not sure why, is Perfect by Rachel Joyce. I read this I want to say while I was at school. It is one of the books I read really early days into my reading journey. So I probably read it when I was maybe 17 or 18, and I really enjoyed it. I'm not sure I can remember much about the plot, but I do remember that it focuses quite a lot on mental health, especially conditions like OCD and I think maybe depression as well. And I remember it being quite heartbreaking but a really interesting story, and it's one that I really want to reread. Again, not sure why I don't talk about this very much, but I was very interested to read this because it's by the same author. So I'd seen a lot of people review this, and I know that this is a very popular book. The movie adaptation also came out like 3 days ago with Jim Broadbent in it, so I think it's probably going to have a bit of a resurgence of popularity as well because of that. So the story is essentially about a man called Harold Fry who receives a letter to say that his colleague, his old colleague, he's retired now, but his ex-colleague is dying from cancer, and it basically sparks an idea that he wants to walk all the way to where she lives in Berwick, from where he lives in Cornwall, in Kingsbridge, I think. Yeah, Kingsbridge to Berwick, so it's like 600 miles, and he wants to walk it essentially as a pilgrimage to get her to stay alive. So it's an interesting story. It has many layers. I won't go into a lot of them because they are kind of spoilers. It's one of those books where you go into it with a very simple idea of what the plot is, and by the end it has become a lot more complicated than that. But yeah, it's essentially about this pilgrimage he takes across the country to save his friend's life. Now, one of my gripes, and this is a very specific gripe that started when I read A Man Called Ove by Fredrik Backman, is I do think authors have this habit, and I don't know where it comes from, of having old people as a protagonist and just making them seem a lot older than they actually are. So Harold, I believe, is about 65. He's just retired like 6 months ago. And the way he behaves in this book, honestly, he should be more like 75. Same with a man called Ove. Again, he's in his 60s in the book. Actually, do you know what? I believe he's 59 in that book, and he seems like a 70-year-old. Same thing here. And I think I take this a little bit personally, and I'm sure she won't mind me saying, but my mum is in her mid-60s, and there is no way she behaves like Harold Fry does. Should be at least a 10-year age gap between my mum and Harold Fry and Ove. So I think, yeah, weird gripe, but I don't know why authors have this thing about wanting to portray old people but then only making them in their 60s. Anyway, that aside, I will let that go. Overall, I did like the book, but I think there were a few things I was kind of getting a bit hung up on. Again, I can't really go into much detail because it does spoil it, but I think some of the things just weren't maybe thought through as much, and ultimately it's a very long miscommunication plot, which is very frustrating. As we all know, miscommunication is not the best trope to write in a book, and ideally I like miscommunication to be solved very quickly. It was not solved very quickly in this book, and it is essentially the whole book, to be honest. So yeah, I think that part of it I found frustrating, but I really loved the sentiment of the book. I loved that it just tried to focus on hope and resilience and perseverance and faith. And Harold ultimately is a very likeable protagonist. We also hear a lot from his wife Maureen, and she again is a very likeable character, and I really enjoyed seeing their relationship to each other and them talking about their past and their marriage and how they came to be where they are today. So yeah, if you want something kind of wholesome and uplifting but with an undercurrent of sadness, then I would recommend this book. I don't think it was perfect. Like I said, there were a few logistical elements I got hung up on, but I did enjoy it, so I think I probably give it 3.5 or 4 stars. I realise I've not been saying my star ratings, have I? Let me quickly run through them. Unfortunate Events I'm giving 4 stars based on the plot alone and not the problematic elements of it. Like I said, I got it from my library, so you know, not been contributing to anything. Black Cake, 4 stars or 4.5. Cleopatra and Frankenstein, 5 stars. 8 Detectives, 4 stars. Tokyo New Station, I think I said that one, 3 stars probably. Kind of Spark, 4 stars. Harold Fry, 3.5 stars. And then Troy was 4 stars. I'm really sorry, that was very messy. You can go on my Goodreads if you want to see what I've actually rated things. So yeah, that is the complete wrap up of everything I read in April. So actually, I don't think it was too much of a mixed month. Nothing below 3 stars, which is good, and 1 5-star read, which is all right. I'll take that. I hope by the end of the year I do have a few more 5-star reads than I currently have, because they've been a bit slow to come this year. If you have any books that are definite 5-star reads, then let me know and I will see if I can read them, because I do want some more, so hopefully I will find some. I've been very ambitious with my May TBR and I have 11 books on there. If you want to see what they are, then go to my Instagram, and there's a pin post at the top of my Instagram. I always have a pin post of my monthly basket, which will show you all of the books I'm attempting to read that month. Normally I achieve most of them. In April I actually did achieve all of them, so pat on the back, well done me. 4 of them were middle grade, but you know, that's fine, still counts obviously. So yeah, I hope you've enjoyed this, and obviously I'll keep doing my monthly wrap-ups every month so you can see what I've read and keep up with everything. And I did promise everybody a video last week that I didn't do, so I will try and do another one very soon. And as always, please like this video and please subscribe to my channel if you have enjoyed this content, and I will hopefully see you again very soon. Bye!